What you are about to read is the kind of story that will make you grip whatever you are holding more tightly. A young girl who loved God with everything she had was told that the worst thing imaginable was actually God's will for her life. And she believed it, until one night someone walked into her room and showed her what love actually looks like. Do not scroll past this. This is a fictional story inspired by real events. Names, ages, and details have been changed, but the truth at its center is happening to real people in real homes right now. Stay with every word. Someone carried this story through years of darkness so you could read it in the light. Where are you reading or watching from today? Drop your city and country in the comments. Let us find each other, pray for each other, and become the family that no distance can separate. My name is Nadia. I am 20 years old, and for 3 years of my life I lived inside a secret so heavy it nearly crushed me completely. I grew up in Birmingham, England, in a household that the entire Muslim community around us considered blessed. My father, Imam, was a man people traveled hours to hear speak. On Fridays, the mosque was always full. After prayers, people would seek his hand, his blessing, his counsel. Women in our community would stroke my cheek and whisper to each other that Allah had truly favored our family. I was his eldest daughter, quietly proud, completely devoted, absolutely trusting. Our home smelled like oud and cardamom. My mother lit incense every morning after Fajr prayer, and the sweet smoke curled through every room like something sacred. I grew up associating that smell with safety, with home, with God's approval resting gently over everything we did. I wore my hijab with care and precision. I knew long portions of the Quran by memory. I loved my father with the kind of pure, unquestioning love that only a daughter who has never been hurt by her father yet can give. He was my guide to God, my spiritual compass, the most righteous man I knew. I had no idea that the cage was already being built around me. I had no idea that the man I trusted most in the world had decided I belonged to him in a way that no father has any right to claim his daughter. It began in the spring of 2019 when I was 16. My father started calling me into his private study in the evenings for what he described as advanced spiritual instruction. He would close the door and speak to me about hidden meanings in the Quran, about special relationships that existed beyond the understanding of ordinary Muslims. He told me that most believers lived at the surface of faith while a chosen few were prepared for something deeper. He told me I was one of the chosen few. He gave me books I had never seen before, texts with interpretations that seemed different from anything I had been taught. He explained that what appeared forbidden to the spiritually immature was sometimes revealed as permitted, even required, for those with deeper understanding. He used the language of prophets and divine revelation. He said Allah had shown him things about my destiny that ordinary people would not be able to understand. I believed him. He was my father. He was my Imam. He was the man whose hands had taught me to pray. Looking back now, I can see exactly what he was doing, carefully, systematically dismantling every boundary, every instinct, every source of protection I had, and replacing them with a theology he had constructed specifically to make me into something he could own. But at 16, sitting in that study surrounded by walls of religious books and the smell of incense from the hallway, all I felt was chosen. The real nightmare was still 3 weeks away. It was a Thursday night in June 2019. My mother had traveled to visit relatives and would not return until the following evening. My younger siblings were staying with our aunt. The house was quieter than I had ever known it. My father called me to his study after Isha prayer. I knocked softly and entered with the same innocent excitement I always felt when he wanted to share something spiritual. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something change in the air. The lighting was different. He was not sitting behind his desk the way he always did. He was standing by the window with his back to me. He told me to lock the door. My stomach tightened immediately. I asked why. He used a tone I had been trained since childhood never to question. The tone that meant obedience was the only acceptable response. My fingers found the lock and turned it with a trembling I could not control. When he faced me, his eyes held something I had never seen directed at me before, something that made my skin feel wrong. He began speaking about spiritual union, about sacred bonds that transcended ordinary understanding, about how Allah had revealed to him that I was to become something I cannot write without my hands shaking even now. I want you to understand what happened in that room. I will not describe every detail because some violations of a person's dignity are too sacred to expose completely. But I will not hide from you what it was. My father, the Imam, the holy man, the most respected person in our community, abused his own daughter that night and called it God's will. He wrapped every moment of it in religious language. He whispered prayers while he destroyed me. When I cried, he told me my tears were evidence of spiritual immaturity. When I shook, he told me I was being refined. When it was over, he held me the way he used to hold me when I was small and had fallen and hurt myself. And he told me in the gentlest voice that this was love, that this was how Allah showed his chosen ones they were special. I was 16 years old. What followed was not a single terrible night. It became a routine, a carefully managed, religiously justified, systematically enforced routine that lasted 2 years and 4 months. By day, I was still Nadia, the blessed daughter of Imam Tariq, the devoted student, the girl who wore her hijab beautifully and greeted the aunties at the mosque with a warm smile. People told me constantly how lucky I was to have such a righteous father. I smiled and agreed and felt something die a little more each time. By night, or whenever my mother left the house for more than an hour, I became my father's secret, his possession, his prisoner dressed up in the language of divine calling. He had built an entire private theology around what he was doing. He showed me texts and interpretations that he claimed supported everything. He reminded me constantly that what appeared wrong to ordinary minds was sometimes commanded to those walking a higher spiritual path. He used Abraham, he used the prophets, he used every sacred name he could reach to cover what he was doing in a costume of holiness. The worst part was not the physical horror, though that was unbearable in ways I still carry in my body. The worst part was what it did to my mind. When the person who taught you everything about God tells you that your revulsion is spiritual rebellion, you begin to question your own sanity. When the man who led you in prayer insists that your pain is really sanctification, something in you starts to crack in a way that has nothing to do with your body. I stopped eating properly. I stopped sleeping. My grades collapsed. I had panic attacks in the middle of ordinary conversations. I could not tolerate being touched by anyone, not a hand on my shoulder from a classmate, not the brief embrace of a family friend. Every creak in the hallway at night sent my heart into my throat. I tried once to reach my mother. It was a Friday afternoon and she was making bread. I stood beside her and asked, barely above a whisper, whether she thought my father ever asked too much of us. She went completely still. For one moment I thought she was going to ask me what I meant. For one moment I thought she might be the lifeline I so desperately needed. Instead, she turned to me with empty eyes and said that my father was a righteous man and that a good daughter does not question his guidance. Then she picked up her rolling pin and continued as though I had said nothing at all. That night I lay on my bedroom floor and stared at the ceiling for hours. My prayer rug sat folded in the corner, untouched for months. Every time I tried to pray, all I could think was that the God I had loved my whole life had apparently handed me over to be destroyed by the man who claimed to represent him. I began to think about not existing anymore. It started as a quiet thought, the idea that if I simply stopped, the nightmare would stop too. It grew until one evening I sat on my bedroom floor with a bottle of my mother's sleeping tablets in my hand, counting them, calculating. I held them in my palm for nearly half an hour. The only thing that stopped me was a thought so quiet and so unexpected that I almost missed it. What if the God my father serves is not God at all? What if somewhere beyond all of this there is a real God who looks nothing like what I have been shown? I put the tablets back, but I did not know how to find that God. I did not even know if he existed. It was a Wednesday night in February 2022. I was lying on my bedroom floor in the dark, having spent the evening searching online for ways to disappear so completely that no one would ever find me. I was not dramatic about it. I was simply exhausted by fear, by pretending, by living in a body that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor and spoke out loud into the darkness, not to the God of my father, not to the God of the mosque, to whoever might actually be listening in the universe, if anyone was. I told that unknown God that I could not live this way anymore, that I could not die this way either, that if he was real and good and different from everything I had been shown, I needed him to show me. The words came out broken and desperate and completely honest. Then I closed my eyes and expected nothing. What happened next I cannot explain in a way that covers it completely. I can only tell you what I experienced. The air in my room changed, became warmer, thicker, charged with something that made every hair on my arms rise slowly. I opened my eyes and turned around. Someone was standing near my bed. Not a person. I knew immediately this was not a human being. This was a presence of pure light. Not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that feels like arriving somewhere you have been traveling toward your whole life without knowing it. He was tall and his eyes held the weight of every sorrow that has ever existed, but also the certainty that sorrow is not the end of any story. He called me by name, not Nadia, the obedient daughter, not Nadia, the secret, simply Nadia, the way someone calls the name of a person they have been searching for across a very long distance and have finally found. He revealed to me that he had been present every single night I had sat in that study. He showed me that he had not been absent in that room, that he had been there, weeping, grieving over what was being done to me in his name, carrying every moment of it so that I would not have to carry it alone forever. He made known to me that what my father had called God's will was never his will, that the God who was standing in my room right now was not the God my father had constructed to justify his darkness. He told me his name was Jesus. That name had only ever been spoken in our home as a prophet to be respected but never worshipped. But standing in my room looking at him, I knew, not through my mind, not through theology, but through something deeper than both, that this was truth itself, not a religion, not a system, a person. And he was looking at me with a love so complete it had no edges and no conditions, and nothing I had to do or be or perform before it was available to me. He showed me something then, a kind of vision of my own life seen from the outside. I saw myself as a small child kneeling on my prayer rug with genuine love in my heart for God, and he was there, receiving it, delighting in it. I saw myself at 12 leading the women in prayer, and he was there smiling at my desire to serve. Then I saw the darker scenes, the study, the locked door, and his face in those moments was not the face of a God who had ordained what was happening. It was the face of someone whose heart was breaking alongside mine. He revealed to me that love that is forced is not love at all, that he had created human beings with the freedom to choose good or to choose destruction, and that my Father had chosen to use his name to cover his darkness. But his choices were not God's choices. His version of God was not God. He placed his hand over my heart, and I felt something move through me that I can only describe as life returning to a place that had gone completely cold. He told me I was his beloved daughter, not because of my purity or my performance or my obedience, but simply because I existed, simply because he had made me, simply because I was me. When the light faded and the room returned to its ordinary shadows, I was still on the floor. But I was not the same person who had spoken into the darkness an hour before. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for 2 years and 4 months was gone. Not lighter, gone. I sat up and looked at my hands and felt, for the first time since I was 16 years old, that I was going to be all right. The next evening, my father called me to his study as he had done hundreds of times before. My body's automatic response was immediate. Racing heart, cold hands, the urge to disappear. But something else was present now alongside the fear. A quiet, settled strength I had never possessed before. I walked to the doorway and stopped. He told me to come in and close the door. I told him no. The word surprised us both. He looked up from his desk with narrowed eyes. I told him clearly, and without raising my voice, that I would not be coming into his study anymore, that I would not be participating in his spiritual marriage, that what he had been doing had a real name, and it was not sacred union, and it was not God's will, and it was over. His face moved through confusion, then anger, then the particular manipulative softness that had worked on me for years. He suggested I was experiencing spiritual warfare, that my resistance was not from God. 6 months earlier, those words would have sent me spiraling. Now they sounded exactly like what they were, the last tool of a man whose other tools had stopped working. I told him that the God he served was not God at all, that his God was simply himself. Dressed in religious language, I packed one bag that night. My mother found me and stood in the doorway with tears running silently down her face. She whispered that she was sorry, the first acknowledgement she had ever given, even indirectly, that something in our home had been wrong. I told her I forgave her. I meant it, but I could not stay. I walked out of that house at 11:45 at night with no money, no plan, and nowhere specific to go. But for the first time in over 2 years, I was more free than I was afraid. A women's shelter took me in that first week. A Christian family connected through a crisis line welcomed me into their home after that. They did not pressure me about faith. They simply fed me and gave me safety and treated me like a person whose dignity was not negotiable. The mother of the family gave me a Bible one evening, quietly, without pressure, and told me it had helped her understand who God really was. Not a religion, not rules, just him. I opened it with trembling hands. I had been told my whole life that book was corrupted. But as I read the words of Jesus in the Gospels, I felt the same overwhelming recognition I had felt in my bedroom that night. This was the same person, the same voice, the same love that had no conditions attached to it. I read about a God who defended the powerless, who challenged religious leaders who used their authority to harm people, who called himself the Good Shepherd because he gave his life for his sheep rather than devouring them. Every page felt like medicine for wounds I did not even have words for yet. 3 months later, I was baptized on a Sunday morning in June. Standing waist-deep in a river with a pastor speaking over me, I felt like everything that had been done to me, every lie, every violation, every stolen year, was staying beneath the water when I came back up. When I surfaced, I was laughing and weeping at the same time, and I did not try to stop either one. That was 18 months ago. Today, I help other young women who have been told that their suffering was God's plan for their lives. I tell them what I know from the inside of my own experience, that the God who ordained their pain is not God at all, and that the real God, Jesus Christ, is the one who enters into suffering to heal it rather than causing suffering to justify himself. There are people right now sitting in homes that look holy from the outside, being destroyed by the very people who are supposed to represent God to them. They have been told that their pain is sacred, that their trauma is God's refining fire, that questioning what is being done to them is spiritual rebellion. Please pray for them. Pray for every person trapped inside a religious system that has replaced love with control. Pray for the ones who are counting tablets on bedroom floors tonight. Pray for the mothers who know something is wrong and are too afraid to say so. Your prayer is not a small thing. It reaches places your feet will never go. And pray for those who persecute in God's name, that they would encounter the real Jesus, who is nothing like the version they have constructed to serve themselves. If you are reading this and something in you has recognized itself in Nadia's story, if you have been told that God ordained your suffering, if religious authority has been used as a weapon against you, if you have been searching for a love that does not demand or manipulate or destroy, pray this right now, wherever you are. Jesus, I don't know who you really are yet, but I want to. I am tired of the versions of God that have been used to hurt me. I believe you died for me and rose again. I believe you walked into dark rooms for broken people, and I am broken, and I am here. Come in, show me what real love looks like. I am yours. Amen. If you just prayed that, please tell someone. Tell us in the comments below. You do not have to carry this quietly for one more day. If this story reached something real in you, please share it tonight with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Drop your city in the comments. Let us find each other and pray for one another across every distance. We are family. My father used God's name to put me in chains, but Jesus walked into my room and showed me that his name was never meant to chain anyone. He came to set the prisoner free, and if he came for me, he is already on his way to you.